Hello, lovies. This is Christina with Karma's Eye Psychic LLC here on Universal Spirit Podcast. We are wrapping up our fourth season. We are wrapping it up, and the last subject that we have is Ukrainian magic. We will be talking about Ukrainian and some, Russian traditions, folklore, and just small legends that might have been told around Russian, Ukrainian, European part of the world. And we're going back to like 1000 AD. And we're going to be coming up on about 1900 AD as well. The 19th century, first century to 19th century. Some stuff today that I'll talk about might even surprise you. Some cultural norms are consistent in Ukrainian magic. However, there are some small little details that are slightly different from our general idea of magic and how we see it, how we practice it, and how we really understand and ingest it really as individuals, and even on a larger scale, and it actually defies some of the stereotypes of magic altogether. Now, my sources are based off of my own research of magic, some things from Google that I have read about, some of my own experiences dating back to when I was a teenager. I also went to Rutgers University and studied mysticism, and I also wanted to include this source written by Valerie Kivelson and Christine Warabek. I hope I didn't butcher their names. There's a source called Witchcraft in Russia and Ukraine, 1000 to 1900. So I kind of mashed that with all my research and topped it off with that last source. Though I did actually learn some things that I previously did not know about, Russian and Ukrainian culture and magic and how witchcraft was looked upon. So I thought it was a really good thing to stumble upon. So we are gonna just have this brief talk about some Ukrainian folklore, witches, witchcraft, and magic. So here we go. Now, first and foremost, which is very interesting, is that in Ukrainian magic, witchcraft, traditional beliefs, and folklore, there is this belief that there is technically no Satan. There's no Satan. There is just a benevolent force, and everything evil is just going against that force, but technically there's no force controlling going against the grain. Like, there's God, but there's no anti-God, there's no anti-Christ figure. It's really just evil being within us to rebel against a good source, against a good way of doing things, against any type of love or charity or goodness. I don't even know what other word to use. If you guys have followed me long enough, I am in desperate need of a thesaurus. But yeah, there's this belief that there is actually no evil guy or girl. It's just a feeling. It's just really an energy that exists that, overtakes you, so to speak, to, rebel. There is the belief of demons, there is the belief of evil spirits, but it's really mostly about choice, that we have the ability to be evil. So a group or a mass would then decide to be that way, and the energy upon it would then create these things such as evil spirits and demons. It's no different than a lot of scientifical thinking that if you were to focus negatively to create a negative energy. So that is one of the interesting things about Ukrainian magic that I did not know before. That there is technically no existence. There's no leader. There's no evil leader in particular. These things are not being led by one source. We are creating these evil sources individually. So it would be almost as if we are our own Satan. We are our own evil. We are our own demons. The creation of our own demons, I think, is very interesting, considering in a lot of history of Wicca and witchcraft and magic is that we create the lives that we live. And for Ukrainian magic not to have or be in the absence of Satan definitely validates that, saying that we are in fact the rulers of our destiny. So if anything evil were to be in our lives, we somehow created it. And I thought that was actually a beautiful thing to uncover. Definitely tell me what you think about that and what your take is on that. After you've done your own research, of course, how would you respond to that? Just, thinking that there would in fact be no devil. I want to know what you think. The next thing we come across is not necessarily surprising, but of course, being most societies are very misogynistic. The only people who could practice magic openly, and confess it and, be masters of it or be magicians are men. It was okay. It was, it was looked upon as a good thing. It was looked upon as a typical thing for a man to be magical, for him to be powerful, for him to be one with the universe, for him to be connected to God, if not be a god himself. Okay, so in the Russian-Ukrainian world, when, Christianity was taking over and the conservative, lifestyle was being oppressed upon, everyone. This idea of, men, being in charge, and then this thing about women being property, and women being, as low, if not lower than children, could not admit to being involved in witchcraft. And if witchcraft was to be suspected of you, a woman was actually the worst person to be practicing witchcraft. It would be then that the man, or assumed that a man had taught her witchcraft, that he should be put to death. He should be jailed or tortured. He should be shamed or punished in some kind of way. And it's also this belief that only a man could have taught a woman to be magical. I found that to be very, slightly disturbing. However, it wasn't such news compared to my previous research. There is this double standard as to, one, witchcraft was not spoken about. It was known about, but it was not spoken about so much at all. There were barely any records of any type of folklore or witchcraft or magic in the Russian-Ukrainian world. Not until, I would say, like the 18th century. And it really didn't come up in anything except for court cases. People claiming to have been hurt or been influenced by witchcraft, or have even been taken advantage of, have been robbed, or my wife or husband has been provoked to cheat on me because of the uses and the influences of somebody else's magic. Really no other physical or mundane means. It wasn't until later in the 18th century where these claims of witchcraft and demon possessions were becoming more and more prevalent in psychiatric records. But even though that they were in psychiatric records, they were still, dismissed as mental illness, even though the rise in claims were getting pretty serious. It was to be believed that these people who were, psychiatrically, mental and, just not okay upstairs had suffered so much torture that they were, either, delusional, they were having, illusions, they were having hallucinations, they were jumping to conclusions, or they were just trying to make sense out of something that their brain had, psychologically failed to make sense out of. So the easier thing to grab onto would be witchcraft. This is happening to me because someone put a curse on me, or this is happening because the devil's after me, or that, that woman, wants to, steal my land. So, she's causing all these problems, because witchcraft actually was looked upon in this 18th century Ukrainian world as a means, well, really all the world, as a means to do a person harm, to assume that the person is using these metaphysical, magical, spiritual intervening things to do people harm, because they can't do it on a physical plane. So it had to be spiritually, done to be physically manifested here in the world that, physical that we live in. So because of the way witchcraft was described and how it was looked upon, it was in fact very, either embarrassing or, very discouraging to write about, to even have records of, to even talk about or even discuss, whether openly or privately. It would almost be looked upon as if you were to consider witchcraft or magic, that you have to consider yourself to be psychologically damaged or mentally ill. So nobody wanted to take on that stigma of being mentally ill, to even talk about it, to even start conversations, to even, speculate anything or any type of magical occurrence was so taboo that you would have to then, take a double take of your mental health and how you stand, on a daily basis, if you're stable or not. So like everywhere, witchcraft and, magic became a concealed practice. It was something that you can only do in secret with a secret group of people, people that you feel like were mentally sane enough to believe and have some type of physical or metaphysical proof that this in fact was real, and that it in fact did, it had some validity in our world for it to work. Now, of course, given the misogynistical background, these cults, so to speak, were started by men, that it was okay to have these cults and gatherings and, groups with men only to, discuss and practice magic, when however a lot of female cults were in fact rising at that time, and for a female to do witchcraft, and especially in like groups, right, was frowned upon, because they would assume that only females would get together to seduce men, to take men down, to, destroy them. That was women's purpose, to get back at men because of their oppressive role in society. So they would really, really fear the power of female magic, female, awareness, and just the female unity was very, very threatening to the misogynistic society that had been set up against them, obviously. Plus, it was easier to then diagnose a woman with psychiatrical problems if they were to find out that she was a witch. And then witch burnings, of course, in the Renaissance, were not so uncommon. It was really a regular practice because of the talk of dragons and fairies, and angels and demons and spirits and multiple gods and goddesses. You were able to, make a woman look very crazy discussing magic. Now, a bit of a twist on that fact is that witchcraft was actually practiced throughout the class system in Ukraine. So you could be poor, you could be very wealthy, you could be royalty, like you could be middle class, upper class, whichever. The practice of witchcraft was actually done in all classes. So it wasn't just something for lower class people, and it wasn't just something for higher class people. It really was like just a general culture. The Ukrainian culture was actually very united when it came to magic and witchcraft. Under, obviously under the radar, but it was like, it's more of a spiritual family rather than, what society has told us that we are. There's no barrier here, whether you're poor or rich or tall or short or fat or this, witchcraft and magic is what, unifies us, makes us a spiritual family. So the spiritual unity in Ukraine is actually very, very tight. You will be able to look that up when you Google it, when you go through many resources, you will see that spiritual unity is something that still exists very much today in their culture. One example I will give is actually a practice that came from Russia in particular, which then filtered down into the Ukraine, where servants of the Tsar had to take oaths against witchcraft when working for royalty, especially if they were physically close to the king, the queen's staff, or even the children. They believed that if you were a witch in some way, that it would affect them negatively, especially if witchcraft was not originally practiced within royalty. Because at the time, I believe of Ivan the Fourth, I think it was, they had to take vows against witchcraft because, first of all, the misogynistic society feared women to overthrow the rule of the man. So royalty feared being overthrown by their servants. So they had a little, mustard seed grain of belief that witchcraft was able to do that. So they had to keep it out of their physical, area. Also, they did not want to be known for normalizing what is considered to be a psychiatrical disorder culture in royalty, that not to ever speak of any type of magic, that all of their power was given to them by God. It's written down in destiny. There are no means other than my entitlement to be in this position, which is unfortunate because Ivan the Fourth, also known as Ivan the Terrible, ended up having a stroke, I guess while playing, I think it was chess, just randomly having a stroke and dying. And then his son, who obviously was unfit to rule, was in fact overthrown very, very soon. And then it was called the Time of Troubles. It has been believed that somebody had put a witchcraft or had used magic on Ivan directly, and that somehow it was infiltrated into the castle or into the royalty, and somehow magic is what mysteriously overthrew his ruling time. Now, it is only a legend, it is only speculation. There is no physical proof of it, but there had been talk about it, that he was just so terrible that groups of witches had cast many spells and had done many rituals to get rid of him in the worst way possible. And I don't know anything worse than literally living your day regularly and then just falling out, passing out dead. So in my opinion, I would have to say that was the work of some type of magic or some type of universal karma. Either way, the mystery continues. For those of you who know that story, leave a comment and tell me what you think about it. Was it magic or was it just him having a stroke? Because it has been debated for so long about this. But anyway, guys, I have wrapped up my Ukrainian Magic episode. Please join me again here on Karma's Eye Psychic LLC Universal Spirit Podcast. I will see you in the next season. Thank you for listening, and I will see you soon. Bye.